Welcome to the Michigan Golf. Join us each week as we explore the people, the places, and the events that shape our great game.
I'm Jack. I am with Bill Newcomb, one of the fine golf architects in the business, with a long list of accomplishments, especially here in Michigan. So, as a matter of fact, we're doing this at Travis Point Country Club, where Bill put this course together, where the Volvic tournament LPGA was here last year. But let's go back to Bill. He was born in Logansport, Indiana, started playing golf when he was 12 years old, and he started to get a lot better, so much so that you were runner-up in the Indiana Amateur, and then what happened?
Well, that was really a stepping stone. I had graduated from University of Michigan, played golf here, and began what was a serious competitive effort for the next couple years. And that started as runner-up in the Indiana Golf Amateur.
But then you won the Indiana Open, right?
I did get serious about golf then.
While you were still an amateur. How many amateurs won the Indiana Open?
Actually, a couple. People here would know Sam Carmichael, but he ended up to be a tour player and was an Indiana boy and won as an amateur.
What about how did you get to University of Michigan? How did you pick Ann Arbor as your college goal?
Well, due to academics. They have a great school of architecture, and even though I grew up within 40 miles of Purdue University, they didn't have an architecture program. I came to Michigan because I liked the Big Ten and wanted to be part of a Big Ten experience.
Well, you certainly were, and you were captain of the golf team.
I was.
And just what big achievements did the Wolverines accomplish in those years?
Well, some marginal achievements. I remember my sophomore year. Freshmen were ineligible then, so as a sophomore, I remember my first road trip was to Columbus, Ohio. And I actually scored one shot better than Jack Nicklaus down in Columbus. It was a windy day, an awful day. I made a couple of putts and chipped one in. And so that was a great kickoff to my college career.
Jack Nicklaus in Columbus. Come on.
But there was a realization among all golfers in the Big Ten, you couldn't beat Jack Nicklaus.
Well, you did.
For a day, for a moment. I had my moment there, that's right.
And then where did you go from there? What was your first architectural assignment? Where did you were raking bunkers or picking up stones or what?
That's right. That was my first internship. Was construction, which was great for me. Actually, I had graduated with a degree of architecture, and I wanted to keep going in the planning area, and so I wanted to get a master's degree in landscape architecture, and was enrolled in that program. Had been there about a year, and we had a terrific project from Fred Mathai, well-known Michigan alum and benefactor, who had a farm very near Ann Arbor, which today we know as Radrick Farms, and he had provided the land and the money to develop what was effectively a faculty staff club for the university, which was going to include golf courses, it was going to include swimming pools, tennis courts, and so forth. And I was a graduate student at U of M when that project came to us as a graduate school project, and we were to lay all that out.
And then how did you manage to work with the Dyes? How did that happen with Pete and Alice Dye?
And I knew Pete from golf in Indiana, and of course he was a great golfer too. The interesting part about this end part of the project from Mathai was I thought our work was done, and I went back to class, and they said, "Wait a minute." Administration said, "Wait a minute. Who do we now contact as a golf architect?" And so I said, well, I don't know. I know some names. I played some courses. So they said, well, there's your thesis, and part of your graduate school finish is we need a full report on who we should contact. And so I believe we had 4 or 5 noted golf architects like Wilson and Trent Jones, and I put in there Pete Dye because Pete was I knew that, and Pete had talked to me about that, and I said, well, and Pete Dye, and then wrote a few lines. Really, he didn't have many paragraphs about Pete at that point.
He was just starting.
He was starting. He was starting, and lo and behold, he interviewed and got the job. And I was beaming in the background, hello. And he hired me as an intern then, my final year in college.
How was it working with him?
Oh, terrific. I always said Pete was so great because he was unencumbered by any design formal background. When I really got into more of the study of golf architecture then with Pete and through his tutelage, and typical Pete, he depended on you to do the work that he would suggest. You know, like Balderstraw, for instance. They held the Open there, I think, first 6 months I worked for Pete. He said, well, you ought to go see Balderstraw. I said, okay. So I jump in the car and I drive off to Balderstraw, and I got to see the, great golf course, and got to see Hogan. And so it was really quite an exciting couple years there with Pete, who would typically call at 8 o'clock at night and say, Bill, I remember particularly, he said, Bill, get on a plane, go to Des Moines. They're having a lunch out there, and I can't make it. Okay, now those were the days you could walk in the airport an hour ahead of time, a half an hour ahead of time, and jump on the plane the way you go to Des Moines. So he had a lot of confidence in him. I always respected that.
So when you go to Des Moines, what do you talk about?
Not lunch. It was just a lunch, a 4-man lunch. And they said, oh, where's Pete? Which did get to be a little problem sometimes. He would send me and never announce that to anyone, and I'd show up and say, well, what are you doing here, Bill?
So what is you graduated from Pete to what?
Well, Pete, along with this, go out and do your own work, and here's the directive part of it. Pete then decided that he didn't want to be overworked, and what was happening was that he was becoming better known as a golf architect in the Midwest, primarily in the Midwest, and he was getting a lot of small jobs. Now I say small jobs, 9 holes here, 9 holes there, in Indiana and Ohio, Illinois. And anyway, he was at that time then working with Jack Nicklaus on the golf club over in Columbus, Ohio, which beautiful golf course, beautiful course. And of course, I'd run over there and see a few things and draw it up and just go back to Ann Arbor, basically. And so Pete was encouraging me. He says, "You've got to play a little more golf up there." He says, "You've got to use some of these credentials." He said, "Okay," and he said, "You won the Indiana Open. You got to get up there and play golf." Okay, Pete, and so I did play some golf, and
You won the Michigan Amateur.
well, a year later, a couple of years later, but it wasn't until I really had to get myself in gear. But Pete had formed this alliance with Nicklaus, and he had told me, he said, "I only want to do two courses a year." Okay, 2 courses a year. They'd be with Nicklaus, and they'd be high-end courses, understood to be. In other words, he didn't want any of this small potato stuff. And so the day came when he said to me, he said, "I've got five projects I really don't want to do." And he didn't say that outright, but he said, "These 5 projects I think would be better with you, Bill." He says, "Why don't you take these and start your own firm?" Well, okay, I probably made more dollars the first 2 years of my architectural career than I ever did after that, because I had these projects, and of course I was running way too thin at that point. But it was terrific start to what would become my career in golf.
What year was that?
This had to be 66, 67, the end, kind of 67, because one of the impetus I had was to play golf. Was I entered the Michigan Amateur, and that's when I won it.
What about when did you coach the Michigan team?
Well, that was later then. That was a little later. After winning the Michigan Amateur, and then beginning my own practice and become known, and I played in a lot of the Detroit area invitationals. And once you win the Michigan Amateur, you're now invited to all these invitationals from people you've never heard of course. Say, Bill, I'd like you know. And as you know, Detroit was a wonderful number of country clubs and events, and so I became known pretty.
A lot of very good players.
A lot of good players. You know, we were blessed in Detroit area to have really good players. Yeah, and so really that led then to more exposure, and once I won the amateur and was exposed to that degree, our single biggest potential client at that point, and eventually was a client, became Boyne USA. Because, and if you look at the history of Boyne, they were very much in the forefront of marketing their product,
right,
with named people.
Well, Everett Kircher, hired all the great skiers from Europe.
Exactly. Stein Eriksen came over.
Right. Yeah.
Best skier in Europe.
Right.
Came over
in the world.
In the world.
Yeah.
Came over to Boyne. Yeah, in the world. That's right. Came to Boyne High. Now, I wasn't the best architect in the world, but he had one of the best. He had worked with Trent Jones.
Right.
Yeah. And as Everett told me, he says, well, we got the plans dropped in from 6,000 feet in a parachute. We never saw Trent Jones. And Everett was that kind of man. He wanted you to sit down with him and discuss what was going to happen.
Well, you not only played all the great clubs around Detroit, you did play the Augusta National Golf Club, the Masters Tournament. How did that come about?
Well, that was possible because of this run I had this summer where I was runner-up in the Indiana Open. I won, Indiana Amateur, won the Indiana Open. So I was primed to go qualify for the National Am. And I did qualify. Qualified up in Chicago. And it was played at Pinehurst that year. And I had actually played Pinehurst as a college golfer. Our coach would take us down to Pinehurst, and we'd play the number 2 course as well as a couple others around there. So I had a working knowledge of Pinehurst, and I was on a roll. And I just walked off of winning the Open and was headed to Pinehurst. I had a tremendous amount of confidence. And lo and behold, it was a neat experience because I was there with my dad. We stayed at the old Pinecrest Inn, where several other golfers were, and so you got to know everyone nationally, and it was just a wonderful experience. And my dad was there, and we were able to do all that, and I just kept winning, to my surprise. Now it was match play, so that's a whole different game, match play, and I kept winning. And my God, I woke up in the morning and we're in the quarterfinals. And I'm looking at Cootie.
Charles Cootie.
Yeah. And of course, he could hit it longer than I could, but I hit it much straighter than he did. And had I not choked, I would have been in the semifinals. I ended up getting beat 1-up. But it was a great experience. And in those days, if you were a quarterfinalist in USGA, that was an automatic invite to the Masters. So that following spring, then I participated in the Masters. Got to play. Well, it was terrific. I was scared to death. Scared to death, of course, And as great as it was to tee it up and play, the beginning part was even greater because I got to play some practice rounds with just outstanding golfers. Guys that I would never think of even approaching, of course. Now I played one round with the amateurs. All the amateurs get together and play a couple of rounds kind of thing, but I wanted to play more because I wasn't a Southern boy like everybody else was. So out of the snowdrift, I'd go out and play 4 or 5, maybe quick to 9 holes, And it was that part of it that at least allowed me to hit the ball on the first tee, because it is a shaky experience.
And that's a tough hole. I don't
It is. One's a tough hole.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It doesn't get enough notice. That green is, oh my God.
Yeah. Every green down there is a challenge.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I was a pretty good putter. So, and they have a little par 3 tournament, before the actual tournament. I tied for third in that. So I, just these little things of playing with some named golfers and tying for third of that, at least I thought, well, this isn't completely foreign to me. But the actual tournament play was, I shot 80 and then 81. And the greens make the golf course.
Absolutely.
It was a fabulous experience. And of course, at that point, I go back to Michigan, ready to graduate. It was quite an experience that I thought, well, maybe I could play professional golf. And I dropped those thoughts pretty quick because I went over the Western Amateur and didn't qualify. Those days, of course, the Western Am in Chicago was a huge tournament.
Right.
And I shot 71, didn't qualify by a couple of shots. And I thought, this school stuff isn't too bad.